with Canadians. We've got Abacus Data's founder, chair, and CEO David Kapelos here with some exclusive new polling on that exact question. Hi, David. Good to see you.
Hi, Vassy.
Thanks for making the time. So you went out last night and you surveyed Canadians on their reaction to Chrystia Freeland's resignation and what it says in the bigger picture. First of all, were they aware of what happened?
Yeah, so we started this survey at 5 p.m. Eastern, and we finished it this morning. And in that period, 80% of Canadians we surveyed said they were aware of the resignation. Over 40% were following this story at least fairly closely. And so in that short period of time, that's a pretty significant breakthrough for a story in Ottawa that is politics, but was covered all day. You were on air all day. And so Canadians throughout the day probably were getting exposed to this. And that's as big a breakthrough as I've seen in terms of a political story coming out of Ottawa.
And the secondary question, the one that that was sort of spurred on by the resignation, was whether or not the Prime Minister will resign. That's something I know you've been tracking for a long time. What do people feel about his leadership? You've broken it down by party. What did you find after last night?
Yeah, well, I mean, when we ask people, should he stay or should he go, basically, 19% of Canadians say he should stay on. But 2/3 say he should resign and the rest are unsure. And most important, I think, is the fact that just over half of those who would vote Liberal today say that the Prime Minister should stay on. So it's not even, there's not even a unified message coming out of his own party supporters. And the fact that he could barely get 1 in 5 saying he should stay on is, I think, an indication for what we've known for a long time, is that the Prime Minister's own favorability, the satisfaction with his government and him personally, were already at a pretty low. I think yesterday's news just pushed a few extra people into the column that probably thought, okay, I think maybe time's up.
You've got some more data, but I just want to ask you, in a reactive way, when you see those numbers, you see what unfolded yesterday, are you surprised that that doesn't appear to punch through to the Prime Minister?
I guess, but on the other hand, I mean, this is not new. I mean, I've been with you on your show multiple times repeating the same numbers, that it doesn't seem to be enough to convince him that there is no path back, that he can't convince these people that he has a future, that they're ready to come back and embrace him. But I do think yesterday was different because it signaled to a lot of people probably who were soft and saying, well, I'm not really comfortable with Pierre Poilievre, but maybe I can be convinced to re-elect this government. One of the questions we ask, and we've always been asking, is do you think the Liberals deserve to be re-elected, or do you want a change in government? That number is now 11%. Only 11% of Canadians think Trudeau and the Liberals deserve to be re-elected. That's dropped 4 points literally in a few days. Right. So that's as low as it's ever been, and I think brings clarity to the idea that there are not a lot of Trudeau lovers anymore out there, and that's the environment this government's facing.
Even within his own caucus tonight, actually, at this point. And we have 2 of those MPs coming up in a few moments. That leads, I think, everybody who's watching to the natural flow from that, which is, is there going to be an election? We have 2 opposition parties in the Bloc and the Conservatives saying we want one immediately, or at least by the end of January. I have seen polling previously, let's say 6 months ago, 4 months ago at the start of the sitting, where the appetite among Canadians was mixed as well. What are you finding about the appetite for an election right now?
Well, I think we're finding pretty broad support. Almost 6 in 10 Canadians say yes, they'd like an election now. 1 in 4 say no. The rest are either I don't care or I don't know. And again, there's a sizable group of even Liberal supporters, people who would say, I'm going to vote Liberal, but still think that election needs to come. And I think what's changed is not just this resignation yesterday and the by-election defeat and a lot of stories came out yesterday, but it's Donald Trump that's hanging over this. And you're hearing from premiers, you're hearing from others saying, we need an election. Forget about what Pierre Poilievre's saying, because he's been saying we need an election for a while. But there's new voices now coming to the table and saying maybe we do need a reset and a chance for Canadians to give a government a mandate to deal with the threat that is Donald Trump to Canada's prosperity.
And has that changed? As you track that number over time, are you seeing a growing number of
It's growing. It's growing. And it's not that overwhelming number. It's not but there's a sizable number of Canadians who aren't really paying much attention to this. So we shouldn't expect that number to ever get to 80 to 90%, because there are some Liberals still who don't want this government out of office. But when you're hitting close to 6 in 10 who want an election, and let's face it, most Canadians don't ever want an election. This is not something they really thrive or demand. I think that's a signal that their patience, I think, is wearing thin on this government, and they want maybe a chance to to decide what the future looks like for the country.
Just got a few seconds left, but if they were to head to the polls, a quick snapshot of how they intend to vote. We've got your latest numbers that we can pull up. What's the takeaway?
Yeah, so 25-point Conservative lead. Not a huge shift in vote intention. It's up 1 for the Conservatives, down 1 for the Liberals. They were already pretty low, historically low in our tracking. Among those most likely to vote, that Conservative lead gets almost to 30 points, which is an indicator, again, that by-election last night, 16% turnout. Conservatives much more motivated than Liberals, and I think that's also something that needs to be on the minds of both New Democrats and Liberals is, are their voters even interested in participating?
Super interesting stuff, David. Thank you so much.
You're
appreciate it. The founder and CEO of Abacus Data, David Kapelos, on the other end of a quick break here on Power Play. We've got two